Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today, we've got two very special guests. This is a very unique episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. We're doing a fiction takeover. So in the month of November, we're doing a NaNoWriMo fiction takeover of the podcast. We've got a lot of great guests that are going to be coming talking fiction, people who have done it, who have become 6- and 7-figure fiction authors, teaching the process. So we're going to be talking about fiction editing. We're going to be talking about cover design, fiction cover design. We'll have a fiction roundtable with a lot of our authors from our Fundamentals of Fiction and Full-Time Fiction program. A lot of things to come, but today we're talking to Steve Higgs. So I'm gonna pass the mic here to Rami here in just a second. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can see both of them. But we've got Rami, aka R.E. Vance, in the house. He runs the fiction program at Self-Publishing School, has published, I can't even keep up, 40, 50, 60 fiction books. I don't even know how many at this point. I think 80,000 copies sold just last year, and has coached hundreds, if not thousands, of our fiction authors on their publishing journey here at selfpublishing.com. So we're in great company. I'm going to be the dumb nonfiction guy today, and be a fly on the wall, maybe if you guys get too advanced, I'm going to ask some of the basic questions our listeners want to hear. But I'll pass it to you, Rami, to give an intro of Steve, and then we can dive in.
All right. Well, I'm really happy to have Steve here today. I met Steve 6 years ago now, I guess it would have been. And
5 and a bit.
5 and a bit, yeah. And I would say that the day I met you, Steve, I was like, if this guy doesn't become full-time, no one will, right? You went into that conference and you literally asked every single person a ton of questions, me included, and it was a lot of fun watching you work that room, I got to be honest. So I have an interesting bio. Now, I will say that some of the stuff on this bio I didn't even know. So Steve is a former British Army captain turned best-selling mystery and thriller author. I take no credit for this bio, by the way. This was the Self-Publishing School's social media team. He started his career as a car mechanic before joining the military. He won his first creative writing prize at the age of 10. And his debut novel, Paranormal Nonsense, was written while still serving in the Army. I did not know that. I thought you had left. Currently living in Southeast England, where picturesque countryside with 2 sausage dogs. I also didn't know that about your dogs. And claims to have ideas for over 100 books waiting to be written. He's a self-described humorist who, oh, there we go. Perfect. He's a self-described humorist who pokes fun at his mechanic past and military service, and now he's a full-time author, enjoying local beer, castles, and vineyard views. So welcome, Steve. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
So first question is, what inspired you to make these major career shifts, especially the leap into becoming an author after, your colorful past?
I think I was always a writer.
Right.
I think if I'd had different parents, I probably would have never joined the military. But I came from a long-standing military family, and multiple generations ahead of me had gone down that route, and I was the 4th of 5th children. The elder 3 were already in the military,
right.
And so it was. I think it was preordained pretty much before I was born that's where I was going. But that sort of love of the written word stayed with me, and I wrote columns for military newspapers and did stuff like that while I was in the army. But I was one of those people who kept saying, I'm going to write a book, and I had all these ideas in my head and swirling around, and never really found the time for them because I was doing other things and studying open university courses and stuff like that, getting ready for the inevitable transition from the military to civilian life. And just in the end, I got bored saying the same thing, but bored listening to myself, and just decided to shut up and do it, which is advice I give to a lot of people. Is and there's no better way of getting things done than to actually start them. And so I was in the twilight of my military career, as you've already highlighted, when I started writing Paranormal Nonsense, the first book I published.
Yeah, so I'll have a question about Paranormal Nonsense, but I want to ask you another question, which I realize despite knowing you for so many years, and I don't know how many conversations we have had over the years, what did your military family think when you first published a book, and then how did that tune change when you made it a proper career?
I think actually, I think this is fairly typical for a lot of authors, especially the indie ones. There's a complete lack of support from family members, including loved ones, because it's a lot of time and effort. It's no small thing to write a book of any length. So there was a complete lack of support from everybody, ridicule, certainly at times, questioning why I was wasting my time with such a foolish endeavor. And even after I published it, and I probably published 5 or 6 books before anyone sort of started paying attention, because there was money coming through the door, and it was only really at that point that the tune started to change. So I from my experience talking to other authors, that's not unusual. There's a very distinct lack of support for this wild, ridiculous dream that they've got about being a writer, and my story was no different.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, myself included. My wife's super supportive, super loving, always helped me. But it was the day that I showed her how much money I was making, and she looked at it and said, "Is that how much you made this year?" And I said, "No, that's how much I made this month." And then that's when it changed. Right? Like, I mean, she's always been supportive. I don't want to say that, but like, yeah. Okay, so you wrote Paranormal Nonsense while you were serving as a captain. How did you balance military duties with creative writing?
I didn't bother doing any work. See, the funny thing about the army, and a lot of people don't realise this, is while you're not away on ops, there isn't actually a lot to do. You're not trying to satisfy any customers. The customers, from a military perspective, are the people you're shooting. So I mean, the twilight of my army career, I mean, going to the gym for 3 hours, that's a legitimate army activity. So I would balance things like that with actually I'm going to do this. I was married, but living and working. So my wife was in Kent and I'm in Hampshire, and there's a good sort of 2-hour drive between the two. So I wouldn't bother coming home every night. It's just too far to come. So I would be in essentially a bedroom. With an armchair and a table, and I would sit and write there. But I didn't finish the book while I was in the military. I couldn't get it done, so I transitioned out and it got put down for quite some time. It actually took me 5 years to finish that first book and get it published. Which and again, I don't think that's unusual. I speak to a lot of people who deliberate for years over that first book, actually trying to figure out how to finish it, learning the process, I think, as much as anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally echoes my story as well. First book, 14 years. Second book, 9 months.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very similar. I hear that a lot.
Hey, let me ask a follow-up here, Rami. I'd be curious, Steve, 2-part question. One, what would be your advice for people who don't have a job where they can do nothing, but they have a job where they're like, hey, I'm lucky to squeeze in 30 minutes, an hour a day or whatever. What would be your advice for those folks? And then if you were to go back, and maybe we go around the horn on this too for you, Rami, is how would you shortcut that 5-year first book and get that book done in a shorter time period?
One of the biggest obstacles that people have to overcome, in my experience, is confidence. Confidence that what you're doing is going to be worth it at the end, which is a very difficult thing because you've got nothing to base it on. You've got nobody in your team, no one supporting you and saying, "No, actually, yeah, I think you can do this." So you've got that. You're lacking that. I think most people are lacking that, and certainly I was. So the advice I give to people, I get invited to go to conferences and talk on this subject of productivity, is to carve out time in your life. And I tell people to stop sleeping on a regular basis. That's my advice. Get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I use myself as an example. So, prior to quitting my job, prior actually to the point when Rami met me, in the almost 12 months leading up to July of 2019, those glorious days in Edinburgh, where Rami and I first met, I would go to bed having written for several hours. So I'm married, I've got a child. My child would go to bed, my wife would go to bed. I would then stay up for several hours writing, crawl into bed after midnight, get up at 5 o'clock and write again. I would then cycle 10 miles to work, work my morning, take my lunch break, and go outside and write for another hour. And an hour is 500 words, or it's 1,000 words depending on how it's like. And then I would write again of an evening, and I would continue with that process pretty much to the point of collapse, and then find some sleep and then start again. I managed to crank out 17 books in 9 months while in full-time employment as director of an engineering company, doing about 70 hours work a week.
Yeah,
that's full-time commitment. Now that's a pretty extreme version, and I'm not encouraging anyone to go down that route. The point is, you've got to find time in your life, and you need it to be regular. I think if you write 500 words and don't look at that manuscript again for 6 months, it's going to be impossible to pick up where you left off. If you're writing every day or on a regular basis, so 2 or 3 times a week, it's so much easier to keep your head in the story and keep it moving forward. You've got to believe in the end product, and believe that the story you've got in your head through just through effort will find its way onto the page. You'll get to the end. So if you're going to write an 80,000 word book and you don't have anything to do that's going to take up your time, well, let's say you're on holiday, let's say you've got time off from work. Yeah. Most people can write 1,000 words in an hour. So an 80,000 word book is 80 hours. If you get up on Monday morning and start writing, by Thursday the book's finished. Again, that's a pretty extreme version, but it really is. It's that simple. It's divisible by hours. You need 80 hours to write that book, or something like that, or 60 hours if it's a shorter book, or 40 hours, or whatever it is. You've just got to find those hours. So how quickly can you find them? Make a Thursday night date with yourself in a back bedroom, and all you do is write. Don't take your phone with you. Don't connect to the internet. Have no distractions. Have that thing right in your lunch breaks, right in the morning. Get up on a Sunday and write until it's time to go to church, or whatever your habits are. Find that time. So that's my how people should tackle that, because most people trying to get into this will have something that takes up the majority of their time. Did that help?
I would like to, not about me, but so when I was in the early days of writing, so I had 3 books, I was making a little bit of money, and I somehow weaseled my way. This is in Vegas, by the way, Steve, which I know you and I have been to. So I weaseled my way into a dinner for 7, basically everyone there was high 6 figures or low 7 figures, they were all there. And I noticed that with the exception of 2 people, there were 10 people. Well, there were more than 10 people, but I was kind of taking note of the 10 top performers. All 8 out of the 10 either had a military background, or were a high performer in a martial art, or what do you call it? Had a very good technical background, the ability to read large swaths of data, right? Those were the 3 qualities that 8 out of 10 people had. And so discipline, right? It's that. It's just the ability to override your willpower. So I didn't have that discipline. I'm overweight. If I get into a fight, push comes to shove, I'm in the fetal position. Right, I'm not that guy. But when I saw that, I was like, how do I become that guy? Yeah. And my way was, my wife was pregnant, and I just went, all right, I'm going to die and I want my kids to be proud of me. How do I do that? And that
Yeah,
gave it to
yeah.
me.
You're talking about that motivating factor, and
Yeah.
and yeah, people, if they want to write, it's very, very easy to procrastinate. It's very easy to put it off because you don't know how to move forward. Move forward anyway,
Yeah.
and figure it out as you go.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's what honestly, that was the one quality that really stood out that first time we met, is that he has the confidence. He just doesn't have the knowledge. Right.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
if you were
Yeah.
just hitting everyone.
No, I get that. Yeah, it's the confidence is the thing that comes with the kind of background I've got. But other people, you don't need to be military, or you don't need to be military to have that level of discipline or that level of confidence. You can go out there and decide that you're going to do it. There's plenty of people in other walks of life that are very successful. You take a cross section of the successful author community, and there's people there from all walks of life. So. People out there listening to this shouldn't think that they're going to struggle because they're not military and they don't have that background discipline. They can teach themselves that if they want to be an author, they'll find a way. If they don't find a way, then they don't really want it.
Right. But don't sell yourself short, Steve, because after
I'm fantastic.
No, but after this podcast lands, what do you call it? Recruitment in all militaries is going to go skyrocket.
All right. No, I'm not here trying to sell the military. No, stay at home and write.
Yeah, all right. So my next question is, how do you manage your creative overflow? Because I get this question a lot with my students. It's like, so a lot of my students have finished, several books or a full series at this point, right? And then they're like, well, what do I write next? I want to be a little bit more thoughtful as to what's going to work. So how do you decide what to write next? And I might ask a second part to this question is, how did you decide to move from urban fantasy to cozy? Right? Like,
okay, I'll circle back to that one. You might need to remind me. The answer on how I decide what to write next is generally whimsy.
Okay.
Because I have so many ideas, and just above my laptop screen, as I'm looking at your faces, is a whiteboard littered with ideas that I and there's a chunk of them I'll never get to. But I think I'm right in saying that I'm currently writing 8 different series,
right?
Flitting from one book to the next to the next to the next. 4 or 5 of them are completely intertwined. So. I'm writing a series about a wedding planner who keeps finding his own. This is cozy mystery, so I mean this is mainstream cozy mystery stuff. She's a wedding planner. She's got a cat and a dog whose voices she can hear, and she's completely clueless when it comes to solving crimes. And she keeps she's a high-end wedding planner for celebrities and rich and that sort of thing. And she, in the final book in the series, is managing. She's been hired to manage the royal wedding of the fictitious king's 3rd son, and that's going to go completely sideways. But I'm bringing in three other series into that story that I'm writing and intertwining that, because I find a reader and they wind up reading 100+ books because they can't escape them because all the stories are intertwined.
Yeah.
So what do I write next? Whatever I can't resist generally,
right.
or that I've got a deadline fast approaching for sometimes. So I'm writing the book I'm writing now because it leads into the book that I'm writing after that, which is a completely separate series. But I have to write this one first, and the one that I'm writing next has got a deadline in January. So I've got to get on with it before I feel that fire underneath my toes too much. Back in January, I took my son to the Natural History Museum. We stayed overnight, which is a thing you can do. And I had him, my 8-year-old at the time, running around in the dinosaur exhibition with his flashlight, having the time of his life. And while we were there, he came up with a story idea, which about 8 weeks later was a book.
Right.
So, and it's that he was being creative and whimsy. I went where the wind blew me. He wanted to write a book, and so now we've got a trilogy of dinosaur stories. Okay. How did I wind up going from urban fantasy to cozy mystery? Is I'm stupid. and I don't know what I'm doing. And everyone laughs when I say that, because like, no, Steve, you make huge amounts of money, and your books are all bestsellers. Like, no, I don't have the faintest clue what I'm doing. I wrote the Cozy Mystery came about. So I was still employed, and the lovely receptionist, as I'm going out, I think I'm off to a meeting or something, but she wanted to ask me how I come up with my characters, because she was reading one of my books. I guess it was known that I was publishing at the time. And she asked me about how I come up with them. And so, just to show off as much as anything else, I stood in the doorway and devised a character, put her into a situation, gave her a name, gave her like a compounding factor that was going to force her into a specific route in her life, and came up with a story. And that then stewed in my head for 6 months. And I hadn't intended to, but I just went, no, I'm going to have to write this, because it's interesting to me. And I'd never heard the term cozy mystery. I didn't know what it was until after I published that book, which was it was kind of intended to be Murder She Wrote style, Agatha Christie kind of murder mystery stuff, but then was described by everyone, apart from the fact this cozy mystery is generally being described as Die Hard, with Angela Lansbury in the lead role. And there's an awful lot of people getting shot and getting chased, and she's running away with a Dachshund under one arm and a gin and tonic in the other that she's trying to slurp while not spilling.
Right.
Yeah. So my books are, I don't want to say my books are all the same, because they're not all the same, but they're all kind of the same flavor. They're very fast-paced action humor. Fast-paced action humor books, set in various scenarios. So I write urban fantasy. You can see just behind my head, that's Anastasia with the sword in her hand and the magic spilling off the other one. That's pure urban fantasy stuff. But again, it's fast action, and there's a lot of comedy thrown in, which I didn't realize at the time that I started writing it. But this comes down to brand, and authors should try and understand what their brand is, and my stuff is very much all the same. There's no bad language in my books. There's no sex in my books. There's no visceral violence. We don't do exploding brains like Karen Slaughter would. So hopefully that answered that question. I have a habit of going off on a tangent.
No, that was great. I actually wanted to ask that question. I don't want to put you on the spot with this question, but like, clearly someone with your background, and you're hilarious, right? Like, so how do you manage the humor? And I know that as someone who also writes humor, it'll be a tough question for me to answer, but like, where does the humor come from, and how do you get the most out of that funny scene, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I genuinely don't know. I couldn't teach it. I've gone through life laughing most of the way, because things around me entertain me immensely. I watch television because it's full of idiots that entertain me constantly. People ask me about that thing I was talking about in 2019, where all I'm doing is writing. And I'm saying, well, what was your wife doing at the time? I was like, I don't know. I hired someone to sleep with her.
Yeah.
His name's Kevin. We go golfing at the weekends. But it's that for what it comes naturally to me for whatever reason. I try to be self-deprecating. The humor just spills over into the books. I whatever's wrong with my brain allows me to write stuff in a humorous manner. So I can take a very serious subject, and without insulting anyone or offending anyone, I can make it funny, make their situations funny, make the fact that someone's just been shot dead funny.
Right. Yeah.
Don't ask me how, because I couldn't possibly teach it.
Yeah. I get that question all the time as well, and it's a really hard thing to put your finger on how to be funny. And my general answer is, you're probably not as funny as you think you are. And so therefore, like, if you try to be funny, that's almost a recipe to fail. And that's a great answer. So, okay, so then in terms of your character development, I know I've looked at a bunch of your books. I haven't read them all because I just don't have enough time. But
That's a few now,
but I wanted to ask, right? So, like, you've obviously worked in practical hands-on jobs, and now the creative pursuit is kind of the opposite end. How does that feed into character development? Not necessarily character choice, but character growth, right?
I'm sorry. What specifically are you asking there? How do I develop? How does what I've done in the past come through in my characters?
Yeah.
A lot of my characters are based on people I've met, and you meet a lot of people in the army. And then I was in the corporate world for quite a few years. And so they're kind of based on that. And one thing readers comment on almost constantly is how believable my characters are. Like and it's that understanding that everyone's motivated by something. When they're doing something, that they're doing it for a reason, whether that's for themselves or whether it's altruistic. The bad guy doesn't realize he's the bad guy. The murderer is generally not. They don't wear a cloak and they don't laugh maniacally while they're sharpening their knives. They are killing someone because it needs to happen generally.
Right.
That's so it's what is motivating that person and trying to understand what's going on inside their heads. And giving them real world examples. When I wrote Paranormal Nonsense, when I wrote that first series of Blue Moon books, which I'm still writing, 7 years, more than 7 years on, I'm still producing new titles for that series. I wanted to give the characters some realism, and I kind of based him on myself or an alternate reality version of myself who left the army in his 30s. And I give him a couple of accents because it gives him sort of this real life grounding. I gave him a mother who's a pain in the backside and things like that, just because most people can relate to that. And I write my characters thinking, what is it about this person that's going to be relatable to the audience? Because everyone knows somebody like that if you base it on a real person.
Yeah. Lee Child said that in some interview I watched where he was like, the appeal of Jack Reacher is that everyone wants to have the opportunity to get on a bus and just go. Right?
Yeah, and to punch people to death and just walk away with no consequences.
That's very true. That's very true. Okay, so then I guess this is kind of a two-part question, but what keeps you motivated now with the level of success you have, right? Like, because obviously you could slow down, and then
yeah.
Well, let's start there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have slowed down. It's probably only going to be about 15 books this year.
Okay. That's slowing down. Yeah.
Only right.
When I quit work in 2019, it was actually my son's 4th birthday. I quit on my son's 4th birthday. He was one of the big motivators because I was just never here. I never saw him. When I wasn't writing, I was not even in the country most of the time. So anyway, when I quit, I set myself the challenge of writing 30 books in 12 months based on, it was an arbitrary number. It was I know the speed at which I write. I think the route to success here is just having more product, more series, more books. Will get me where I need to be income wise. And I never expected to make the kind of money that I have made. That was never in my head. But I didn't reach 30 books. I got to 29 in 12 months, and one of them was a November. So but I have slowed down. I am taking it easier. I'm not as driven as I'm not as hungry as I am.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I love writing. I wake up every morning, especially when I'm in the middle of the story, and I'm so keen to find out what happens next, because I don't know. It's very much the train laying the track in front of it as it goes along, and I've got a vague idea where the story's going. Yeah. But it's very character driven. The stuff I write, I write murder mystery, and I don't know who the killer is. I tend to figure that out as I go along. So I'm very motivated. Just on a personal level, because I love the writing. I want to write the next book. I want to explore where the characters are going, and it's fun. It's real good fun because I'm writing comedy, possibly, but it's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, no, it's that's what I tell my students is like, this is like, if you want to make money, go rob a bank, right? Like this is, it's going to be long hours. It's going to be painful. You're going to want to throw your computer out of it. So you better love it.
Yeah.
You gotta love
Yeah.
story. You gotta love the process, and we all have partners who we love and at the same time occasionally want to murder, right? Like that's just the relationship of true love, right? Like there's good and there's bad, right? And everything, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, if my wife ever is murdered, it was not me, and I do not want to be a character in your book, Steve. Just saying that. Okay. Just putting that.
Okay.
All right.
Noted.
Noted. Okay. Okay. So my second question, or the second part to this question is, and I suspect I know the answer. What was your routine in 2000, late 2019, and what is your routine today?
They're not much different. I get up every morning and I write until some point around dinner time when it's time to stop and be with my family. Both my children are now at school. The big driver wasn't money. I mean, it was the desire to escape the corporate life and to be my own boss and to manage my own life. I needed to earn enough money to make that work. But the big driver was lifestyle. I wanted to be at home for my kids. I wanted to be able to drop my kid off at school and pick him up from school and be there to do things with him. And that wasn't the lifestyle that I had, having left the army and gone into corporate life. So that was the big driver, and that's still very much there. So sometimes I'm up early. I don't get up at 5 o'clock anymore. That's a change, because that was pretty much almost, there was probably five plus days a week most of the time. Back when I was first trying to make it as a full-time author. I'm more relaxed about it all now. I think because the books sell. There's a lot of them. There's more coming out. I've got a solid fan base. I don't need to write the next book, I think is the point. But I want to write the next book. So I'm there 5 days a week, and sometimes a little bit of stuff on the weekends if I don't have other things that I need to do, writing and marketing and liaising with other authors and doing this, being part of that community, because it's very insulated. I go days without seeing people other than on the school run, which isn't really social.
Yeah.
Which isn't really social communication of any kind.
Yeah.
So it's very insulated. So it's nice to have the author community there to reach out to and have an occasional chat with someone about what they're doing. And we make friends with other authors as we go along, and I've got an extensive number of them I can reach out to.
Yeah, it's true. I find I've gone so deep down this rabbit hole that the only people who really understand me are other authors.
Oh yeah, well you can't go to the pub and talk about this stuff. You can't talk numbers because that would just be vulgar. But you can't talk about stuff. You can't explain that I've just finished a book and I'm completely emotionally drained. Yeah. And the only thing I want to do is lay in the corner and drink neat spirits or whatever that escape is. And it surprised me how draining some of the books could be. And you get to the end of a series where you've written 10 books. And the first time I experienced this was with Cozy Mystery, and I wrote a 10-book series, and it was the last few chapters where I sew everything up and deliver everything that I know the reader wants. And it left me, 25 years in the military, I'm sat there writing Cozy Mystery with tears streaming down my cheeks because it's so joyous. I'm utterly emotionally drained.
That's why I stopped writing in coffee shops.
Right, because you're out there sobbing. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one time where I was like writing a scene where the character lost her father, and I was crying so hard that these two girls on another table sent me a piece of cake because they thought I was writing a breakup letter.
Right.
That's incredible.
That's a wonderful anecdote.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that's probably lots of authors have something similar. Probably not that extreme, but that's great.
That's also a good hook for an email to market that book, Rami. Sobbing in coffee shops.
Honestly, that's probably the best meet cute I've ever heard. I might have to use that now somewhere. The names will be changed to protect the.
Right. I said
author,
I don't want to be a character in your book.
Hey, Rami, I want to ask a quick question. I want to be respectful of Steve's time here and maybe pass it to you for a final question before we wrap. So you said, Steve, going to the pub, talking about what you're doing, or heaven forbid you talk numbers and it just becomes vulgar. Because let's just be real, and I think you're a humble guy. You're killing it. I mean, incredible. I mean, 7-figure fiction author, and when I just scroll on, I'll screen share for people who are watching this on YouTube. I mean, when I scroll Amazon, it is just series after 5,000 reviews, 2,000 reviews, 3,100 reviews, 7,200 reviews on this. I mean, it is just series after series, book after book. I don't even know how many tens of thousands of reviews, and I can only imagine how many copies sold. It's pretty incredible.
I'm coming up on 1 billion pages read. On
a billion pages read. That's incredible. So I guess my kind of parting question would be, knowing what you know now, what would you say back to the person who's listened to this, who maybe they're 3 books in, or maybe they're just listening to this with a dream saying, I can't even imagine publishing this first book. Like, what advice would you give them?
To accept the grind. It's very hard at that starting point. I've likened it in the past to pushing a boulder up a hill with your face, because there's so many unknowns. There's so much you need to figure out. There's so much doubt. There's no support network. You're trying to climb a mountain, because at the mountain is all this wonderful, fresh, pure air and money rains from the sky. But getting there, it's really difficult, and you've got to accept that grind, because there's all this work that pays off before you get there. If you speak to almost any of the successful authors in the community, go to the conferences. This is my advice. Go to the conferences and speak to the authors out there who are making it, who are doing well, who are doing good 6 figures or 7 figures. And maybe the 7-figure aiming point is too high. I don't think anybody that is making 7 figures aimed for it. That's just a byproduct of doing those stages and being successful and keeping at it. The route to success is not an easy one, and there will be disappointments along the way. You've got to expect to get a bloody nose every now and then. You can't get through life without it. So, expect a few bruises and scrapes. Expect 1-star reviews. The successful authors all go through this period where nothing much is happening. They're not making any money. They're grinding away. I've listened to author panels where there'll be 5 or 6 7-figure authors on there, and everyone will say, no, there were 10 books in, there were 12 books in, there were 15 books in before they saw any real money. That was exactly my story. I had 15 books out before I first made over £1,000 of profit in a month. That was two and a bit years into my career when suddenly things started to swing and tail upwards. So it's different for everyone. Some people are almost overnight successes, but actually the overnight success is not something to look for, because most of those overnight successes don't last. They flame hard and then they burn out.
The longer it takes to build it, the longer it lasts, right?
Yeah, but I think that's true, and it's a lifelong commitment. You've got to be completely in it if you want that success. You've got to build a very, very strong foundation, and you've got to write good books, and you've got to figure out what you don't know, which goes back to what Rami said about me in Edinburgh. You've got to figure out what you don't know and then go and close those holes. Yeah. Learn to feed yourself. It's the marketing thing. The old statement about teach a man to fish. So a marketer would say, if I teach a man to fish, he'll have no further use for me. And it's that simple. You need to learn marketing as much as writing books. If you can market them, that's where the money is. That's where you're fishing. Writing that, you've got to write a good book, yes. But if you can't market it, you're never going to sell the damn thing. So you've got to learn all those other bits and pieces. But the good news is there's lots and lots of online advice out there. There's YouTube channels like this one. There's places where you can go to find this knowledge. There's books that you can buy from Amazon. You can find time. I used to write all day and then collapse into the bath at night and watch a YouTube tutorial on something, because there was all this knowledge that I needed to gain. So that's my thoughts on that subject. Accept how hard it's going to be. You're not going to be an overnight success. Do not be put off when your first 5 books don't make any money.
And I wanted to just echo something you were saying a little earlier. Like I and I'm sure you do too, without mentioning names, but I do know a few authors who had that like overnight success and then never found it again. But they had that series or that one book that just like, 6-figure year, but that was kind of like a glitch. And then the rest was.
And then and they never recapture it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of this is a very important fact, very important statistic. 90+% of my monthly income, regardless of whether I launch a book or not, is backlist. Paranormal Nonsense, when I first launched it, got a 1-star review on Amazon.com and died. And I didn't sell any copies for quite a while. In 2022, it was the #1 vampire thriller on Amazon.com for almost the entire year. And I didn't change anything. It was just about marketing.
Yeah.
So
Drop
don't worry
mic.
about your book. Don't worry about your book not selling to start with. You'll get there.
Incredible. Do you have a final question before we wrap, Rami?
I really don't, except like, thank you. And if I do wind up in your book, I need to die gloriously. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking raped to death in public by a donkey at this point.
Yeah, it's got to be a glorious one. A glorious
or spanked by midgets covered in $1,000 dressing.
Yeah, there you go. As long as it was heroic. That's all I need.
What an incredible way to end it.
Yeah.
There's some things you can't unsee, and that will be one of them that I will probably be seeing as I put my head on my pillow tonight. This was awesome. Incredible interview. Thank you so much, Steve. I want to just give a plug here, guys. Steve Higgs, check out his books on Amazon. He's got a ton of them. You've probably heard of them. They're doing just really well. Bunch of great books. Actually, I'll ask you this as we close, Steve. Is there one that you would recommend people buy first? Like, if I've never read any of your books, what's the first one you'd say?
That's very difficult because it depends what your taste is. If you want to read something, I would tell them to go and read Old Habits.
All right. Old Habits.
That is a hard-boiled mystery thriller where an older retired gentleman and his dog, he's got a nose for trouble and he wanders into a town hiding a deadly secret and things spiral downwards from there. I tell you what, it's like Jack Reacher at 80 with a dog.
All right.
I love it. I love it.
There you go.
Well, guys, check out Old Habits. Big thank you to Steve. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We've got more fiction episodes coming up in the month of November as part of NaNoWriMo, so stay tuned. We've got episodes, like I mentioned, on editing coming up, fiction cover design, fiction editing. We're going to be murder boarding some books, which if you don't know what that is, show up to the upcoming episode. And if you want to find out more about our fiction programs, go to selfpublishing.com/fiction. Steve, you're the man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. You take care.
See you guys.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps of how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.